They called it a celebration. Crystal chandeliers burned like frozen stars above a room full of people who had everything. Money, influence, faces trained to smile without feeling. The mansion in Bel Air glowed behind tall iron gates, its glass walls reflecting champagne flutes and designer shoes that cost more than most homes. At the center of it all stood Ethan Ross, a billionaire, a builder of empires, a man who measured human worth the way he measured profit, quickly, coldly, without regret. Laughter rippled through the room as Ethan raised his glass. But it wasn't joy, it was performance. And tonight, Ethan was bored. His eyes drifted across the guests and stopped. Near the kitchen entrance, a man in a plain uniform knelt to wipe up a shattered glass. Quiet, careful, invisible in a room designed to notice only power. Ethan smiled. Not a kind smile. An idea had just formed. "Ladies and gentlemen, Hornerman," he said loudly, slicing through conversation. "Let's have a little fun." The room hushed. He turned toward the staircase. "Noah," he called, "come down here, son." A boy appeared at the top step, 10 years old, perfectly dressed, too small for the weight of the silence that followed. Everyone in that room knew the truth. Noah had been deaf since birth. Ethan rested a hand on the boy's shoulder and looked back at the kneeling man. "Tell my son something funny," he said. "Go on, talk to him." Nervous laughter broke out. Some guests looked away. Others leaned in. And just as the humiliation reached its peak, the man stood up. But he didn't speak. He stepped forward and slowly, deliberately, knelt in front of the child. And that was the moment everything changed. Before we go any further, take a moment and subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. These stories aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt. If you believe that faith can still break through pride, pain, and impossibility, you're in the right place. And as you listen, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. We read everyone, because what you're about to hear isn't just about a miracle of hearing. It's about a heart that had to be broken before it could be healed. From the outside, Ethan Ross's mansion looked like a promise. Glass walls rose from polished stone, reflecting the Los Angeles night like a mirror that refused to show flaws. Architects called it modern. Designers called it bold. Those who worked there called it something else entirely. Cold. Inside, every surface shone. Italian marble floors, sculptures that meant nothing except money. Music floated softly through hidden speakers, carefully calibrated to feel expensive. Ethan moved through the room like a king inspecting conquered land. People laughed at his jokes a second too quickly. Compliments followed him like shadows. No one contradicted him. No one ever had. He liked it that way. What few people noticed was the absence of warmth in his eyes. Ethan had learned long ago that warmth was inefficient. Control worked better. Across the room, Mateo watched everything without being seen. He had worked in the house for 3 years, cleaning floors, carrying linens, fixing what others broke without noticing. He spoke little, not because he couldn't, but because no one ever asked him to. Mateo had once had a different life, a smaller apartment, a wife who prayed every night, a child they lost too soon. Faith was the only thing that had survived. That night, as he wiped wine from marble, Mateo felt something shift inside him, a heaviness, a warning he couldn't explain. Then Ethan's voice cut through the air. "Mateo!" The sound of his name spoken by the owner of the house made Mateo's stomach tighten. He stood slowly, keeping his eyes lowered. Ethan smiled for the crowd. "This man does everything around here," he said. "Cleans, fixes, obeys." Soft laughter. "But tonight," Ethan continued, turning toward the staircase, "we'll see if he can do something special." That's when Noah appeared. The boy descended the steps carefully, his hand brushing the rail, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had learned early not to meet people's gaze. Pity was harder to bear than silence. Ethan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Mateo," he said casually, "talk to my boy." The words landed like a slap. Mateo froze. Everyone knew Noah couldn't hear. The laughter this time was quieter, uncomfortable, but no one stopped it. Mateo felt the heat rise to his face. He could walk away, he could quit, he could let the moment pass. But then, Something else happened. Not a voice, not a command, a presence, gentle, steady, certain, as if someone unseen had stepped close and whispered without sound. I am here. Mateo took a breath, and instead of speaking, he stepped forward and knelt, right in front of the child. The room waited. That was the strange thing about power, how it trained people to pause, to lean forward, to hold their breath for whatever came next. The guests didn't speak. They watched. Ethan Ross enjoyed that silence. He took a slow step closer, circling Mateo and the boy like a man inspecting merchandise. His voice stayed light, amused, the way men speak when they believe there will be no consequences. Well, Ethan said, go on. Mateo remained on his knees. From where he knelt, Noah looked impossibly small. His polished shoes didn't quite touch the floor. His hands rested stiffly at his sides, fingers curled in on themselves like he was bracing for something he had felt many times before, but never understood. Mateo swallowed. He could feel the eyes on his back. Wealth, judgment, curiosity disguised as sophistication. Ethan tilted his head. Maybe you didn't hear me, he said louder now. I said talk to my son. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd. Someone near the bar glanced at their phone. Another guest shifted uncomfortably, pretending to sip champagne. No one spoke up. No one ever did. Mateo lifted his eyes to Noah's face. The boy wasn't looking at him. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, already retreating inward. Mateo recognized that posture immediately. It was the posture of someone who had learned that staying still hurt less. Ethan crossed his arms. Tell him a joke, he said. Say anything. He won't mind. Will you, Noah? Noah didn't respond. Of course he didn't. Ethan chuckled. See? He doesn't even know you're there. Something twisted in Mateo's chest. It would have been easier to speak, easier to mutter a sentence, easier to play along and let the moment end. But the presence remained, not urgent, not forceful, just there. Mateo reached out slowly, careful not to startle the boy, and rested his hand lightly against Noah's chest, over the steady, frightened rhythm of his heart. The room stiffened. This wasn't part of the entertainment. Ethan frowned. What are you doing? He asked. Mateo didn't answer. He didn't pray out loud. He didn't perform. He didn't explain himself. He simply stayed there, grounded, still, like someone waiting for a door to open that only he could sense. And then it happened. Noah blinked. Once, then again. His breathing changed, shallow at first, then faster. His shoulders rose and fell more sharply, like his body was reacting to something his mind didn't yet understand. A woman near the fireplace froze mid-sip. Ethan leaned forward. Noah? He said, irritation creeping into his voice. The boy's head tilted, not toward Mateo, toward the space beside him, as if he'd noticed something else. The room seemed to pull inward, the air tightening, heavy and electric. Someone dropped a fork. The metallic clatter rang out, and Noah flinched, just barely, but enough. Ethan's smile vanished. What did you do? He demanded. Mateo withdrew his hand slowly, his own pulse pounding in his ears. Nothing, he said quietly. I just touched him. But everyone in that room knew something had happened, and somewhere beyond sight, beyond reason, something unseen had begun a work that no one there could stop. No one spoke. The kind of silence that filled the room wasn't polite. It was stunned. The laughter that had hovered just moments earlier had vanished, replaced by a tight, uneasy stillness that pressed against the glass walls of the mansion. Ethan Ross straightened slowly. What is this? He said, his voice lower now, sharper. Mateo, get up. Mateo remained kneeling. From this close, he could see the faint tremor in Noah's hands, the way the boy's chest rose and fell too quickly, like a runner who didn't remember how he'd started moving. Mateo felt it too, a change in the air, subtle but unmistakable, as if warmth had entered the room without permission. Not heat, presence. He couldn't explain it. He didn't try. Mateo simply stayed where he was, his hand hovering now just above Noah's chest, no longer touching, but not withdrawn either. His breathing slowed, not because he forced it, but because something within him had steadied. Ethan took a step forward. I said, get up. Before Mateo could respond, Noah moved again. His eyes shifted, not wildly, not in fear, but with focus. They tracked something no one else could see. His head turned slightly as if following a sound that didn't exist. A woman near the staircase whispered, "Did you see that?" Someone else shook their head quickly, as if denying it might make it go away. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Noah," he said louder. "Look at me." The boy didn't. Instead, Noah's shoulders relaxed. Just a little. Mateo felt his throat close. This wasn't excitement. This wasn't confusion. It was recognition, the kind that doesn't need language. A fork slipped from a plate somewhere behind them and hit the floor. The sharp metallic ring echoed through the room. Noah startled. This time there was no doubt. He flinched. His eyes widened. His breath caught. The sound faded, but the reaction remained. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. "That's not possible," he muttered. Mateo slowly lowered his hand to his side. Whatever had begun, it was no longer his. "I didn't do anything," he said softly, more to himself than to Ethan. "I swear." Ethan rounded on him. "Then explain it." Mateo met his eyes at last. Not with defiance, not with fear, with honesty. "I can't." The room felt smaller now, like the walls had leaned in. Guests shifted uneasily. A few reached for their coats, suddenly eager to leave. Others stood frozen, afraid to miss whatever came next. Noah swayed slightly. Mateo reacted without thinking, steadying the boy by the shoulders. Noah didn't pull away. He leaned in, instinctively, as if Mateo's presence anchored him. Ethan's voice cracked through the moment. "Get him upstairs," he snapped. "Now!" As staff hurried forward, Noah's head turned once more, back toward Mateo. Their eyes met. For the briefest moment, something passed between them. Not gratitude, not understanding. Connection. Then Noah was guided away, disappearing up the staircase. The crowd exhaled all at once. Ethan stood rigid in the center of the room, hands clenched at his sides. He looked around at the guests, at the fear now replacing amusement, at the questions no one dared ask. The party was over. But whatever had entered his house that night had not left. And deep inside, though he would never say it aloud, Ethan Ross felt something he had not felt in decades. Unease. Morning came quietly. Sunlight slipped through the sheer curtains of the Ross mansion, stretching pale lines across marble floors that had been scrubbed clean hours earlier. The echoes of the party were gone. No laughter, no music, only the low artificial hum of a house that never truly slept. Noah woke up before anyone came for him. That alone was unusual. For as long as he could remember, mornings arrived through touch, hands on his shoulders, gentle shaking, a face hovering close so he could read lips. Sound had never pulled him from sleep, but this morning his eyes opened on their own. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling as something unfamiliar stirred beneath his ribs. Not pain, not fear, awareness. Noah turned his head slowly to the side. At first there was nothing. Then, something else. A faint tremor passed through the mattress. He froze. Another tremor followed, stronger this time, rippling through the bed frame like a quiet wave. Footsteps. Someone moving down the hall. Noah's heart began to race. He pressed his palms flat against the sheets, holding his breath, waiting. When the vibration came again, he felt it clearly, through his hands, through his arms, through his chest. His eyes widened. This had never happened before. Carefully, he sat up. The movement caused the wooden bed frame to creak, and though he didn't hear it, he felt the response. The subtle resistance of the air, the shift of weight, the echo inside his own body. Everything felt closer. In the bathroom, Noah brushed his teeth with more force than usual, watching his reflection as the motion sent small vibrations up his arm and into his jaw. He tapped the mirror lightly. The glass answered back, not with sound, but with sensation. Downstairs, the house was waking. Noah moved slowly, barefoot on the polished floor, each step sending a faint signal upward through his legs. The staircase groaned softly under his weight. He felt it, every step, every response, like the house itself was speaking in a language he was only beginning to understand. At the breakfast table, Ethan Ross sat with a newspaper open in front of him, coffee steaming beside his hand. He hadn't slept. The image of the night before replayed in his mind without mercy. The kneeling, the touch, the way Noah's head had turned. Ethan had dismissed it as exhaustion, as coincidence. But when Noah entered the room, something tightened in his chest. The boy sat down, reached for a piece of toast, and began spreading butter the way he always did. Careful, methodical, practiced. Then the knife slipped from his fingers. It struck the porcelain plate with a sharp metallic impact. Noah's head snapped to the side. Instantly, Ethan froze. The coffee cup hovered inches from his mouth. He stared at his son, waiting for the moment to collapse into nothing, to be proven wrong. Noah frowned, picked up the knife, and let it fall again. The reaction came faster this time. Ethan set the cup down slowly, his hand trembling. "No," he whispered. Noah looked confused now, not afraid but curious. He was testing something, dropping the knife again, watching his own response as if his body were answering questions his mind hadn't learned to ask yet. Ethan pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. Noah didn't react to the sound, but he felt the vibration, and that was enough. Ethan stood there staring at his son as the first crack appeared in the certainty he had built his life upon, because something was happening, and it was only beginning. Ethan Ross did not believe in accidents. Every success he had ever claimed came from control, planning, leverage, pressure, applied at exactly the right moment. Chance was a word people used when they didn't understand the system behind the result. This, whatever this was, had to fit somewhere inside that logic. He watched Noah from across the breakfast table, saying nothing, his face carefully neutral. Inside, his mind raced, rearranging possibilities like numbers on a balance sheet. The knife falling, the reaction, the timing. Coincidence, he told himself. A fluke. The human body did strange things under stress. Doctors said that all the time. Noah dropped the knife again. His head turned, slower now, less startled, more deliberate. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pushed back his chair and stood abruptly. The legs screeched against the marble floor. The sound was sharp, unmistakable. Noah didn't react. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief washed through him, thin and fragile. "You see?" he muttered under his breath. "Nothing." He moved behind Noah, careful, precise. Raised his hands and clapped once. Loud, close to the boy's ear. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Ethan straightened, nodding to himself. Paranoia. That was all it was. A father seeing patterns where none existed. But when he returned to his seat, Noah continued his strange experiment. Dropping objects, watching the floor, tilting his head slightly as if listening to something beneath the surface of the world. Ethan's relief curdled into irritation. This wasn't supposed to happen. He folded his newspaper with sharp movements and stood again. "Finish your breakfast," he said curtly. "You're late for your lesson." Noah didn't look up. Ethan paused. That too was new. For 10 years, Noah had moved around him like furniture. Present but unresponsive, a quiet ache Ethan kept locked away behind work and wealth. Now there was something else in the boy's eyes. Attention. Ethan turned and walked out of the room, his steps fast, clipped, echoing down the hall. He didn't notice the way the air felt thicker near the staircase, or how the lights overhead flickered once, just once, before steadying again. In his office, he closed the door and leaned against it, pressing his palm flat against the wood. "Get a grip," he said to the empty room. His phone was already in his hand. He scrolled past names without thinking until he found the one he wanted. Dr. Lawrence Adler, chief otolaryngologist, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The man had diagnosed Noah himself years ago. Profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. No treatment, no hope. Final. Ethan pressed call. It rang twice before a calm voice answered. "Dr. Adler's office." "This is Ethan Ross," he said. "I need him here today." There was a pause. "Mr. Ross, the doctor has surgery scheduled." "Cancel them," Ethan snapped. "I'll compensate accordingly." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll let him know," the assistant said carefully. Ethan ended the call and stared at the dark glass of his office window. His reflection stared back, controlled, composed, untouched by doubt. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. The image of Matteo kneeling flickered in his mind. The touch, the stillness. Ethan clenched his fists. No, he wouldn't allow it. This would be explained, measured, contained. Because if it wasn't, then it meant there were things in his world he could not buy, threaten, or control. And that was unacceptable. Dr. Lawrence Adler arrived just after noon. He didn't come in a rush, and he didn't come impressed. Men like Ethan Ross were common in his world, powerful, demanding, convinced that money could bend biology if applied forcefully enough. The portable equipment was set up in a guest room on the second floor. Noah sat quietly in a chair, feet dangling, watching the movement of cables and sensors with the same focused curiosity he'd shown all morning. Dr. Adler worked methodically, tuning forks, reflex checks, tympanometry. Nothing new. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. Ethan felt the tight knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. "See?" he said, keeping his voice even. "This is what I told you." Dr. Adler didn't answer. He adjusted a set of electrodes and glanced at his assistant. "Let's run an auditory brainstem response," he said, "just to be thorough." Ethan crossed his arms, watching through the glass as the test began. Soft clicking sounds were delivered through earphones placed over Noah's ears. Sounds the boy had never responded to in 10 years. The monitor flickered to life. At first, the line remained flat. Silent. Ethan nodded, vindicated. Then the line moved. Not much. Barely perceptible. A tiny rise, then a fall, like a hesitant heartbeat. Dr. Adler leaned closer to the screen. He frowned. "Run it again," he said quietly. The assistant reset the test. The clicks sounded again. The line jumped. Small, weak, but unmistakable. Dr. Adler straightened slowly. "That's interesting," he murmured. Ethan stepped forward. "What does that mean?" "It means," the doctor said carefully, "that we're seeing neural activity where there shouldn't be any." He adjusted the electrodes, recalibrated the machine, and repeated the test a third time. The waveform appeared again, consistent, faint, but real. Silence filled the room. Dr. Adler removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "These pathways were non-functional. They don't regenerate like this." Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "So what are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying," the doctor replied, "that something has changed." Noah shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Matteo stood quietly near the doorway, hands folded, eyes lowered. He hadn't spoken since the doctor arrived. No one had asked him to. Dr. Adler looked up and noticed him for the first time. "Who is that?" he asked. Ethan's voice was sharp. "An employee." The doctor studied Matteo for a moment longer than necessary, then turned back to the monitor. "I need to schedule a full evaluation at the hospital," he said. "Imaging, neurology. This isn't something I can explain here." Ethan nodded once, too quickly. "Do it." But as the equipment was packed away, Dr. Adler hesitated. "Mr. Ross," he said, lowering his voice, "whatever you think this is, it didn't come from stress or imagination." Ethan didn't respond. He watched Noah being led from the room, the boy glancing back once, just once, toward Matteo, as if drawn by something he couldn't yet name. When the door closed, Ethan turned slowly to face the empty space where Matteo had stood. The certainty he had clung to all morning cracked, not enough to break, but enough to let fear seep through. Because for the first time in his life, the numbers didn't add up, and science, his last line of defense, had just blinked first. Ethan Ross did what he always did when something threatened his control. He watched. Within hours, a private security team was installed throughout the mansion. Discrete cameras nested into corners, microphones hidden behind vents. Motion sensors calibrated to track every hallway, every doorway, every inch of the glass palace he owned. If something was happening under his roof, he would see it. Mateo noticed the changes immediately. Not the cameras. He had learned long ago not to look up. But the way the house felt. The air in certain hallways seemed heavier. The silence carried weight, as if the walls themselves were listening. He kept working, mopping floors, folding linens, moving quietly from room to room with the same steady rhythm. When he prayed, he did it under his breath. Words barely formed, more intention than sound. That's when the first camera glitched. In the security room, a guard frowned at the monitor. "Sir," he said, pointing, "camera 12 just blurred." Ethan leaned forward. The feed showed Mateo walking down the east hallway, but the image around him bloomed with light, the edges softening, details washing out as if the lens couldn't focus. Then it snapped back to normal. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Interference," he said. "Fix it." They recalibrated. An hour later, another feed distorted, this time the audio. Mateo stood in the supply room, head bowed, lips moving faintly. The microphone filled with static, not silence, not noise, something in between. The technician adjusted levels. "That's strange," Rahi muttered. "It only happens when he's there." Ethan felt irritation flare, sharp and hot. Coincidence. But coincidence kept repeating itself. Lights flickered briefly when Mateo passed near Noah's room. Doors hesitated, catching for half a second before opening. The temperature in certain corridors dipped just enough to raise goosebumps. Nothing dramatic, nothing provable, just enough. At 3:33 a.m., Ethan woke suddenly. No nightmare, no sound, just certainty. His heart pounded as if he'd been running. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed the same numbers it had the night before. 3:33. He sat up slowly, listening. The mansion was silent. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses inward. Ethan swung his legs over the bed and stood. The floor felt colder than it should have. He took a step toward the door and froze. The lamp on his dresser flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Ethan swallowed. "Get a grip," he whispered. He turned on the lights and scanned the room. Nothing. No one. Just expensive furniture and his own reflection in the glass. But the feeling didn't leave. The next morning, Noah sat on the floor of his room, surrounded by objects. Blocks, a toy car, a plastic cup. He dropped them one by one, watching his own reactions with intense focus. Mateo paused in the doorway, unseen. Noah dropped the cup. His head turned immediately. Mateo's chest tightened. This wasn't recovery. This was awakening. From the security monitors, Ethan watched the same scene. He zoomed in, hands trembling despite himself. Noah's reactions were stronger now, more precise. And every time the boy grew overwhelmed, every time his breathing quickened and his hands shook, he looked for Mateo, not his father. Ethan slammed his fist against the desk. "Who are you?" he whispered at the screen. As if in response, the camera feed froze, then went dark. Sleep came late for Ethan Ross. When it finally arrived, it wasn't gentle. He found himself standing alone in a vast chamber that didn't resemble any courtroom he had ever known. There were no flags, no seals, no judge's bench. The ceiling rose so high it disappeared into shadow, and the walls, if there were walls at all, seemed carved from something older than stone. Light filled the space, but it came from nowhere. It didn't blind. It revealed. Ethan looked down at his hands. They were empty. No phone, no watch, no documents. For the first time in decades, there was nothing to hide behind. He took a step forward. His shoes made no sound. "Hello," he called. His voice vanished as soon as it left his mouth. Then he felt it. Not eyes, not a gaze. Awareness. The kind that didn't look at you, but through you. The light shifted and images appeared in the air around him. Not like screens, like memories torn open. A waiter flinching as Ethan dismissed him in front of colleagues. An assistant swallowing tears after being publicly humiliated. A contractor threatened into silence. Laughter, always laughter. Ethan shook his head. "This isn't real," he tried to say. No sound came out. Another image formed. A hospital hallway, bright, sterile. A woman lying exhausted on a bed. Doctors speaking urgently. A choice being explained. A warning given. Ethan's chest tightened. No, he mouthed. The scene continued anyway. His own voice, firm, impatient, irritated. I'm paying for this. Do it my way. A signature. A decision. A line crossed. The image dissolved. Ethan staggered backward, but the chamber had no edge to reach. The light intensified. Not harsh, not angry, just undeniable. Then came the certainty. Not spoken aloud, not heard, felt. You are fighting me. The words didn't accuse. They stated. Ethan dropped to his knees. He tried to bargain, to justify, to explain context, pressure, necessity. The language of boardrooms and contracts formed in his mind, but none of it mattered here. The light wasn't interested in reasons. It showed him results. Noah's small hands clenched in confusion. Years of silence. Distance mistaken for fate. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps. His chest burned. He pressed his palms to the floor, expecting cold stone, but felt nothing at all. Only truth. Then the light receded slightly, just enough to allow one final thought to settle, heavy and unavoidable. You cannot silence this. The chamber vanished. Ethan jolted awake, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. His sheets were soaked with sweat. His heart hammered so violently, he pressed a hand to his chest, afraid it might give out. The room was dark, familiar, safe. He reached for the clock. 3:33 a.m. again. Ethan swung his legs off the bed and stood unsteady. He staggered to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at his reflection. The man looking back at him didn't look powerful. He looked afraid. Not of losing money, not of scandal, of being seen. As he turned off the light, something inside him whispered a truth he had spent his life avoiding. Whatever was happening in his house was not asking for permission, and it wasn't finished. By morning, Ethan Ross had a plan. He always did. Fear to him was just another variable. Something to be managed, contained, neutralized. And there was only one language the world had ever consistently responded to when Ethan spoke it. Money. He convened his legal team in the glass conference room overlooking the canyon. 6 attorneys sat around the polished table, tablets open, pens ready. They expected instructions about contracts, acquisitions, damage control. Instead, Ethan placed a folder at the center of the table. Inside were copies of Noah's preliminary test results, waveforms, notes, inconsistencies no one could explain. This doesn't leave this room, Ethan said evenly. I want confidentiality agreements, retroactive if possible. Doctors, technicians, anyone who's seen this. One of the lawyers hesitated. Mr. Ross, medical data of this nature. I'm not asking if it's easy, Ethan cut in. I'm asking how much. Silence. The oldest attorney, gray-haired and careful, closed his folder slowly. This isn't about money, he said. This is about ethics. Ethan's eyes hardened. Everything is about money. The man stood. Not this. One by one, the others followed, quietly, professionally, leaving their chairs empty. Ethan remained seated, hands flat on the table, breathing hard. Fine. He would go around them. Calls went out to physicians, researchers, consultants. Some refused immediately. Others asked for time. One agreed, voice shaking. Not for profit, but for fear. Fear of ridicule. Fear of losing a career if the impossible was acknowledged. Ethan felt a brief surge of relief, but that night the man called back. I can't do it, he said. I won't sign. Why? Ethan snapped. There was a pause on the line, then quietly. Something's wrong. I can't explain it, but I won't lie about this. The call ended. Ethan threw the phone across the room. It struck the wall and shattered, pieces skittering across the floor like broken teeth. The house responded. Lights flickered in the hallway outside his office. Not violently, just enough to be noticed. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if pressure had dropped without warning. Ethan stood, heart racing. This is ridiculous, he muttered. By afternoon, rumors began to leak. A nurse texted a friend. A technician mentioned an anomaly. A single sentence appeared on a private message board used by medical residents. Deaf child showing neural response after unexplained event. No explanation yet. Ethan's phone began to ring. PR advisors, investors, journalists who never called him directly until now. Outside the gates, the first van appeared. Then another. Helicopter blades chopped the air above the canyon, distant but unmistakable. Ethan stood at the window, watching the road fill. For the first time in his life, he realized something with cold clarity. He could not buy this away. Whatever had begun in that room, the kneeling, the touch, the silence, it had moved beyond contracts and threats. The truth was walking on its own now, and it wasn't asking his permission either. The noise arrived before the questions did. Helicopters hovered above the canyon, their blades cutting the morning air into uneven pulses that Noah felt before anyone warned him. Vans lined the street outside the gates, logos stamped on doors, antennas rising like metal spines. Cameras pointed upward, hungry. Inside the mansion, order dissolved. Security guards shouted into radios. Assistants whispered urgently. Phones rang and rang and rang. Ethan's name echoed through hallways that had once known only curated silence. Noah sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by familiar objects. Blocks, a small drum, a soft ball, trying to make sense of the storm building around him. Each vibration felt stronger now, sharper. Too many signals arriving at once. His breathing quickened. A door slammed somewhere downstairs. The impact rippled through the floor. Noah flinched, hands flying to his ears, not to block sound, but to ground himself. "Easy," a nurse said gently, kneeling nearby. "It's okay." But it wasn't. The world was getting louder in ways his mind didn't yet know how to filter. Every footstep, every dropped object, every distant thud pressed in on him at once. Then a man broke through the side gate. He was tall, aggressive, camera already rolling as he sprinted across the lawn, shouting questions no one answered. Guards chased him, yelling, reaching, and the man tripped. Not over a hose, not over a step. He pitched forward on perfectly flat ground, the camera flying from his hands and shattering against a stone planter. He hit the grass hard, blood blooming from his nose. Later, he would swear something grabbed his ankle. No one would believe him. Inside, Noah cried out. Not a word, not a sound, but a raw release of overload. He curled inward, shaking, overwhelmed by a world that had arrived all at once. Everyone froze, except Mateo. He moved without urgency, without announcement. He knelt beside Noah and extended a hand. Noah grabbed it immediately, clinging as if it were the only solid thing left. Slowly, his breathing eased. From across the room, Ethan watched. He saw the reporters outside, the guards scrambling, the image of his life unraveling in real time. But his eyes stayed on one thing. His son, finding calm not in him, not in doctors or nurses, but in the quiet presence of a man he had humiliated. Something in Ethan's chest cracked, and as the cameras pressed closer and the questions grew louder, he realized with sinking certainty, the storm had only just begun. The hospital was quiet in a way Ethan Ross wasn't used to. Not the controlled silence of boardrooms or luxury cars, but the attentive stillness of people who knew something fragile was unfolding. Noah lay inside the imaging suite at Cedars-Sinai, small and motionless beneath the arc of machines that hummed with restrained power. A team of specialists watched from behind the glass. Neurologists, audiologists, researchers whose careers were built on patterns and probabilities. None of them spoke much. They didn't need to. The images told the story. On the monitors, Noah's brain lit up in bursts of color, connections forming where there should have been emptiness. Pathways that had been dormant for a decade were awakening, not gradually, not cautiously, but explosively, like roots breaking through concrete. "This isn't recovery," one neurologist murmured. "This is regeneration." Ethan stood with his arms crossed, nails digging into his palms. "You're saying it's permanent?" The woman didn't look away from the screen. "I'm saying I've never seen anything like this." They began the auditory recognition phase. Different sounds were played through Noah's headphones, music, tones, ambient noise. His brain responded, but only faintly. Activity flickered, uncertain. Then a technician hesitated. "We have one more stimulus," she said, "from earlier recordings." She pressed play. Mateo's voice filled the room. Not loud, not polished, just a simple sentence, recorded days earlier during a routine medical interview. "I only placed my hand, and I prayed." The effect was immediate. Noah's brain erupted with activity. Wave after wave surged across the monitor, recognition patterns forming, stabilizing, strengthening. The room fell silent as every specialist leaned closer, eyes wide. "That's it," the neurologist whispered. "That's the first full linguistic recognition." Ethan staggered back a step. "What?" he demanded. "That doesn't make sense. That's not his mother's voice. That's not mine." The doctor turned to him slowly. "The brain recognizes what it associates with safety," she said, "with meaning, with connection." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. His son's brain had chosen, not him. The truth struck harder than any headline ever could. For 10 years, Ethan had provided everything money could buy. Therapies, devices, specialists flown in from around the world. And yet, when Noah's mind finally learned what a voice was, it recognized Mateo first. Ethan felt his stomach twist violently. He turned away just in time. Retching into a nearby sink, his body rejecting the realization his mind could no longer deny. He gripped the edge of the counter, shaking. This wasn't about sound. It was about presence, about who had knelt, who had stayed, who had loved without demanding anything in return. Behind him, the monitors continued to glow, mapping a miracle that had nothing to do with wealth or control. Ethan wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, eyes burning. For the first time, he understood the depth of what he had lost and the cost of the man he had been. And just as that truth settled, a nurse approached quietly and held out a large manila envelope. "This was delivered for you," she said. "No return address." Ethan stared at it, his hands suddenly unsteady. He didn't know it yet, but inside that envelope was the final blow. The truth he could never outspend. The truth that would explain everything. Ethan didn't open the envelope right away. He stood in the hallway outside the imaging suite, the manila folder heavy in his hands as if it weighed more than paper ever should. The hospital lights hummed softly overhead. Nurses passed by. A cart rolled across the floor. Life continued. But something in Ethan knew, deep, instinctive, undeniable, that once he read what was inside, it wouldn't. He stepped into an empty consultation room and closed the door. The envelope tore open with a dry, final sound. Inside were photocopies of medical records dated 10 years earlier. Noah's birth. Ethan recognized the hospital letterhead immediately. Private, prestigious. The best money could buy. He skimmed at first, impatient, expecting nothing new. Then his eyes caught the red markings, handwritten notes, underlines, margins crowded with comments that hadn't been there before, or maybe had, and he had chosen not to see them. He slowed. Prolonged fetal distress noted. Oxygen deprivation risk increasing. Cesarean section strongly recommended. Ethan swallowed. His fingers trembled as he turned the page. Recommendation refused by father. Patient insisted on continuing natural delivery despite repeated warnings. Decision influenced by cosmetic concerns expressed by family. The room tilted. "No," Ethan whispered. He read it again, then again. The words didn't change. His memory surged back with brutal clarity. The delivery room, the doctor's tight voice, the clock on the wall, his wife exhausted, frightened, the obstetrician pleading just once more for authorization, and him, impatient, annoyed, certain. "We've paid for the best. Do it my way. We can fix everything afterward." He had been thinking about scars, about control, about image. The next page detailed the aftermath. Bilateral sensorineural hearing loss consistent with hypoxic injury. Damage likely permanent. Outcome linked to delayed intervention. Ethan's knees buckled. He collapsed into the chair, the papers sliding from his hands onto the floor like accusations he could no longer outrun. Noah hadn't been born broken. He had been made that way. By him. For 10 years, Ethan had blamed fate, genetics, bad luck, doctors who didn't move fast enough. He had wrapped the truth in legal language and buried it beneath money and denial. But the truth had never left. It had simply waited. Ethan pressed his palms to his face, a broken sound tearing from his chest. Not the controlled breathing of a man in crisis meetings, but raw, shaking sobs that bent him forward. "This is my fault," he whispered to the empty room. The words felt like fire, and then he felt it again. The presence. Stronger now. Not condemning. Not comforting. Revealing. There were no words. None needed. The truth spoke for itself. The miracle unfolding in Noah's life wasn't random. It wasn't cruel irony. It was restoration, a correction. What pride had destroyed, grace was repairing, using the hands of the one Ethan had humiliated. Ethan's chest heaved. He sank to the floor, surrounded by scattered pages, his reflection warped in the glass wall, like a man he barely recognized. "I did this," he said again. "I did this to my own son." The door opened quietly. Ethan didn't look up. He heard footsteps, slow, respectful. Papers being gathered gently from the floor, set back into order. A hand placed the folder back in his lap. Mateo stood there, saying nothing. No judgment, no triumph, just presence. Mateo rested a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder. No pressure, no demand, then turned and left the room as quietly as he had entered. Ethan remained on the floor, the truth finally bare in his hands. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a victim of circumstances. He was the cause. And somewhere, beyond his grief, beyond his shame, a question waited, patient and unavoidable. What would he do now? Ethan Ross did not leave the room for hours. The hospital moved around him, shifts changing, voices passing, doors opening and closing. But he remained seated on the floor, back against the wall, the folder resting unopened on his lap now, as if the truth inside had already burned itself into his bones. For the first time in decades, no plan formed in his mind, no leverage, no phone call, no strategy, only the quiet realization that everything he had used to build his life, control, pressure, certainty, had failed him completely. By the time he stood, his legs were stiff, his face hollow. He walked out of the hospital without calling his driver. Outside, the late afternoon light felt too bright, too honest. At home, the mansion was unusually still. The cameras were off. Ethan had ordered it himself. He went to the kitchen, another place he had never entered, and poured himself a cup of plain coffee, no assistant, no schedule. He sat at the small table where the staff ate, hands wrapped around the mug as if he needed something solid to hold. He waited. Mateo arrived a few minutes later, pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. He stopped short when he saw Ethan sitting there. Out of place, unguarded. Their eyes met. Ethan swallowed. The words he had practiced for years, for courts, for boards, for negotiations, were useless now. "I need you to teach me," he said quietly. Mateo blinked. "Sir?" Ethan's voice shook. He didn't try to steady it. "How to be human." The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Mateo studied the man in front of him. Not the billionaire, not the employer, but the father who had been stripped of his defenses. After a long moment, Mateo pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. He didn't smile. He didn't preach. He simply nodded. That night, Ethan slept for the first time in days, not deeply, not peacefully, but without fear. At 3:33 a.m., he woke as he had every night, but this time the heaviness was gone. The presence remained, not as judgment, but as invitation. In the morning, Ethan changed. He put on simple clothes. He dismissed meetings. He signed papers without spectacle, selling assets, setting up funds, redirecting money toward children who needed hearing care and families who couldn't afford it. Not for headlines, not for redemption, because it was right. When Noah woke later that morning, something was different. Not just the way the house felt, but the way his body did. The world no longer arrived as vibration alone. It came with edges, with clarity, with sound. Noah sat up in bed, heart racing. He listened, really listened, And for the first time, the ticking of the clock on the wall didn't just register. It spoke. He pressed his hands over his ears, tears spilling as sound rushed in. Too much, too fast, but real. Downstairs, Mateo swept the floor near the windows, praying softly as he worked. He felt the air shift and looked up. Noah stood at the top of the stairs, eyes wide, shaking. Mateo dropped the broom. The boy took a step, then another. When Noah reached him, he opened his mouth and tried, his face scrunched in concentration, his voice rough and untrained. Ma. Teo. The word wasn't perfect, but it was unmistakable. Mateo fell to his knees, arms opening as Noah ran into them, crying and laughing all at once. From the doorway, Ethan watched. He didn't step forward. He didn't interrupt. He let the moment belong to them. And for the first time in his life, he understood what humility looked like. Ethan heard the sound before he understood it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, a footstep on marble. He froze in the hallway outside the living room, one hand braced against the doorframe. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, hope disguising itself as sound. Then it came again, another step, measured, careful, real. Ethan turned slowly. Noah stood at the bottom of the staircase, barefoot, pajama pants too long, eyes wide and shining with something Ethan had never seen before. Not confusion, not distance, awareness. The boy lifted his foot and placed it down again, watching his father's face as if waiting for confirmation that what he was experiencing was real. Ethan's breath caught. Noah, he whispered. The sound of his own voice seemed to echo back to him in ways it never had. Noah's head tilted, not sharply, not startled, just attentive. The boy took another step. Ethan didn't move. He didn't rush forward. He didn't reach out. For once in his life, he didn't try to control the moment. Noah stopped a few feet away. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. His brow furrowed in fierce concentration. He was fighting for something, pulling it up from a place that had been silent for 10 years. Ah! The sound came out broken, unsteady. Ethan dropped to his knees. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a gesture. His body simply gave way. Noah tried again, his chest rising and falling fast. His lips trembled. His voice cracked. Da! Ethan's vision blurred instantly. The boy squeezed his eyes shut, as if pushing through resistance, then opened them again and finished the word. Dad. It wasn't perfect, but it was everything. Ethan collapsed forward, wrapping his arms around his son with a careful desperation, afraid that too much pressure might shatter the miracle. Noah stiffened for a second, then relaxed, sinking into the embrace. They held each other there on the living room floor. Not billionaire and heir, not broken child and distant father. Just two human beings finding each other again after a decade of silence. Nearby, Mateo stood quietly by the window, hands folded, head bowed. He felt the presence again, no longer heavy, no longer corrective, peaceful, complete. Ethan looked up through tears and met Mateo's eyes across the room. He nodded, not in thanks, in acknowledgement, because some gifts were too large for words. 6 months later, the ocean spoke first. Waves rolled in along the California coast, their rhythm steady and unhurried. The sky stretched wide and blue above the sand, gulls crying in the distance. Noah ran barefoot along the shore, laughing, not the silent laugh of before, but a full, ringing sound that carried on the wind. He stopped every few steps, turning his head to catch something new. The crash of water, the call of birds, the wind brushing past his ears. Each sound was a gift. Ethan sat on the sand nearby, shoes off, phone nowhere in sight. He no longer wore tailored suits, no longer chased schedules that never loved him back. He watched his son and listened. Dad, Noah said clearly now, pointing toward the horizon. Listen. The ocean. Ethan closed his eyes. He listened, not just with his ears, but with a heart that had finally learned how. Behind them, Mateo walked along the shoreline, collecting shells with Noah, the boy narrating each discovery in a voice that grew stronger every day. Mateo listened patiently, smiling at every imperfect sentence like it was a miracle all its own. And it was. Ethan had sold much of what once defined him. He funded clinics, paid for surgeries, supported families who had no voice and no resources, not for praise, not for redemption, but because humility had taught him what power never could. Some miracles restore hearing, others restore hearts, and sometimes the greatest miracle is when pride finally kneels, so love can stand. If this story moved you, subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. Here we share stories that remind us faith still walks beside us, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to listen. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you know someone who needs hope today, share this story with them, because miracles don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper, and those who listen are never the same.